I'd like to ask the Minister for Policy and Reform, pursuant to his answer in July, by which date all Isle of Man public sector workers will be earning at least a living wage.
Call the Minister to reply. Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr President. The Public Services Commission is currently in the process of completing a project in order to introduce a new pay and grading system for manual and craft staff to be implemented early next year, backdated to 1st of April 2019. Once this project is finalised, we should be in a better position to assess the extent to which some groups' grades, if any, will still fall below the living wage. Consideration will also then be given to any other non-PSC groups to establish the extent of the issue in total and enable dialogue to continue with departments about affordability and affording the rise. It remains the aspiration to apply the living wage to the government workforce, but how to deal with the 13.3% increase in the rate earlier this year is best resolved, and indeed has to be resolved, as part of discussions about pay awards and structures.
Supplementary question, Mr Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I've asked this question a number of times over the last 2 years, and every time I seem to get a slightly different answer, a slightly different variation on Mr Thomas's truth instead of myth. I'd like to ask the Minister, originally he stated that substantive employment groups would be paid the living wage by the end of June 2018. He's now saying that it still hasn't happened because of potential cost implications, and that it might happen in the future, but it will only be backdated now to April this year. Can I ask why his dates keep changing, why his plans keep moving? I thought the government had made a firm commitment on this issue already, and that is not the impression that I'm getting.
Reply, sir.
Thank you, Mr President. And myths can develop if there's inaccurate presentation of the facts. So the commitment for June 2018 was met as part of the JEGS process and the collective bargaining with unions, and we didn't go out and publicise it because we're not that sort of government. We probably should do more of this. But in November 2018, there was back pay to 1st of April 2018 for all of the people who had received lower than the living wage. So that process was met, and that commitment was met in exactly the way I'm describing, that the commitment now with the new living wage rate will be met, because we have collective bargaining. We have properly organised job evaluation and grading system processes. When you change somebody's grades, in fact, more generally the terms and conditions of the work, it has to be in consultation with them, and it takes time. So the commitment was met in 2018, and it should go out loud and clear from this court that commitment was met. We didn't show off about it, we didn't brag about it, we just quietly went around making things better off for the lower paid inside the public service, and that's what we're doing now, as explained very clearly in the answer. So debunk that myth out there that we're not paying the living wage. It's just we're paying it inside a collective bargaining arrangement and inside an organised HR process of job evaluation and grading and getting rid of bans. And once we've done it in PSC, which is part of the discussion later on about the move from the Department of Education and Sport and Culture of 600 people to the PSC, it'll happen in the Honourable Questioner's own Department for Education, Sport and Culture, and it'll also happen in the Health Department where there are other people, and it'll also happen in the Infrastructure Department where there are some people affected. And that is an organised process, it's a fair process, and that myth is now debunked. The living wage is paid in 2018, and it will be in 2019 as per government's policy and Tim Wood's policy as well.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr President. Given the reduced entry requirements and higher pay, has any analysis been done on how these policies are affecting the island's private sector employers?
Thomas, reply.
Yes, and that probably will be debated in the context of poverty, perhaps today. But in essence, when the living wage report was prepared by Economic Affairs for government, subsequent to the Tim Wood resolution, we made estimates of the impact using earnings survey data on what a living wage would mean for private and public employers. We made estimates of what the impact would be for the national insurance system and for various things like the public sector pay bill, what the impact would be for income tax. And so we do constantly keep under review, and if any member wants anything tested to develop policy, please don't hesitate to ask for specific analysis to be done. And it's a very important point. The same sectors that have only been able to afford to pay lower than the living wage and struggle to pay the minimum wage have been there for some time, and we all know what they are. It's retail, it's some hospitality trades, it's some aspects of social work, and I can assure honourable members that everything is being done to assist those sectors in being able to pay living wage. The last point, if you don't mind, Mr. President, is that we all have to remember that the living wage isn't as helpful as when it's thought of as one wage rate. What the Living Wage Report showed us in 2017 when it was published is that it costs a lot in the Isle of Man to have children. It costs more to have to be disabled and to flourish in your life. And so we should start thinking of the living wage calculations as being living income standards calculations, as being minimum income standards if you're going to have a normal, acceptable life. And I know the Honourable Questioner from Ramsey agrees with me on that, and I hope we can work together to debunk myths about all of these sorts of things.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. A supplementary question in two parts, maybe, then, Mr. President. Firstly, how many people are affected by this? How many people are going to fall into this backdating policy? Perhaps if you could give us a number for last year. Because we now have, for most of the public services now, a 3-year pay deal. And would the Minister accept that we perhaps need to make sure that this is more forward-looking rather than retrospective? Because it must be remembered for the last 8 months that these people have been living below the living wage and having to make ends meet, waiting for the government, if you like, to catch up. We need to have a system that's forward-looking and what's being done to make sure that when pay rates go up, that they are ready and fit for purpose at the time of the pay increase for everybody else.
Reply, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I haven't got the figures there, but from memory it was around 100 in 2018. And because of that very point, the collective bargaining system agreed, on proposal from government, that the living wage adjustment was taken out of the overall collective bargaining arrangement, which was taking some time to put in place the excellent 3-year agreement. And I do think that concern that has been raised is a valid concern now. But having said that, however, we're talking about £200,000 and about 200 people at the estimate that was provided to the Honourable Questioner from Ramsey back in July. And that's being done as part, not only as part of the JEGS process, but it's also being done as part of the wider public revenue, public expenditure process, because money's tight in the public service, and we've got to make sure that we deal with this in a proper way. And you did hear you mention the word affordability, and it's in the Department for Education and in the Department for Infrastructure that there's and the Department of Health and Social Care that there's a hit in terms of adjustments to these people, because I think it shocked everybody that the living wage went up in 2019 by 13.3%.
Give the last supplementary, Mr. Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm exceptionally glad the Minister has referenced minimum income standards in his answer. I'm sure that will come up later on in this sitting in a later debate. My last question for the Minister on this issue for the moment is, in his answer in July, he stated if a commitment was made to lift all staff up to the living wage. It wasn't. A commitment has already been made. I just want to check that he is now on the floor of Tynwald today making that commitment.
Minister to reply.
Programme for Government already had a commitment, and that commitment's never been changed.